welcome to another episode of Boomer Has It. I'm JB Miller in London.
And I'm Jim Jalamas in Brooklyn. How's it going, everybody?
So, back in 1995, Matthew Weiner, a successful writer on The Sopranos on HBO, pitched the platform an idea for a series about advertising men in the 1960s, specifically in New York, specifically on Madison Avenue. To their later regret, HBO turned him down. So did Showtime. So Mad Men debuted on AMC in 2007 and was an immediate critical and ratings hit, winning 16 Emmys, including 4 for Outstanding Drama Series over its 7 seasons and 92 episodes. It's finally landed on HBO, and a whole new crowd has been watching it. Jim's been watching it for the second time. So what's new about it, do you find?
Well, it's interesting because we came to this topic because anecdotally, we observed people watching Mad Men all of a sudden. It's an 11-year-old show. How could that be? I live in a pretty young neighborhood, and I hear a buzz about it. So naturally, this is Boomer Has It. We don't go on anecdotal information. We
We
don't
do a deep
speculate. We don't
dive.
conjecture.
We don't take anything for granted.
But we are baby boomers, so it passed us by that HBO is now featuring it. They started featuring it in January, so it creates a whole new demographic to watch an 11-year-old show. So part of the question is, how did it age? How did this show age? If everyone recalls, with everyone in the right vintage will recall it was a kind of a shocking show because people were smoking. They were drinking all day at their jobs.
The
Uh,
very first scene is him lighting a cigarette. That's how we meet. That's how we meet Don Draper. Remember, he's sitting in it looks like the Oak Room or somewhere, and he takes out a cigarette and he asks the black waiter to light a cigarette, and then he gets into a discussion about smoking with him. Remember what brand he smokes? That's
right.
the that's how we meet this guy, um, and so yeah, smoking seemed almost fetishized in the series, I
It
thought.
certainly did. And then you mentioned the race of the waiter.
Yeah,
And right, so this is all pre Me Too. It's pre George Floyd.
yeah,
It's pre a lot of stuff.
yeah. It's
So
pre so many. It's pre the modern world.
that's sort of that's the other question is, how has this show aged? And what does it mean for viewers who are, maybe in middle school, or in my case, my daughter was a toddler,
Yeah,
um,
it
who are
actually.
rediscovering it.
Yeah, and it's not just 7 year or whatever. It started in 2007. So the first episode was what's that 19 years ago. It was like the pre-dystopian era.
Yes, right.
Obama was elected the following year. We watched the early episodes here in London on BBC Four, and it was a much more hopeful era than we're living through now. Um, it was maybe a different way to watch it.
It was pre-streaming, and it was still a time when there was appointment television. I
Yeah,
suppose that exists now, but with cable and networks,
that's
you
so.
you
But
didn't really have choices like that.
yeah,
So anyone who was a fan, they would just line up and prepare themselves for Sunday night when it aired, and then we got all we wanted. The show was 6 seasons. Am I right?
seven
7
seasons.
seasons.
And yeah, and I think 7 seasons is what they want to go into a syndication. I think that's what they aim for, I believe. Um, that's a long successful run. 92 episodes. That's a lot to syndicate that, so they make all their money back. Um, it was when it started out. Were there still so-called water cooler moments? Is that a term we have to explain to anyone? When people worked in offices, they would supposedly gather around the water cooler to discuss the previous night's episode
That's
or something,
right.
right?
Gather round, youngins. Uncle JB is going to tell you a little story about office
Sorry
life.
about how what it used
Long time ago,
to be like water coolers,
he worked at an office
offices.
in a log cabin.
Those were the days, the water coolers. And that was when water didn't have as much plastic in it. So it was, even though the water was in a plastic container, I don't think the water itself was riddled with microplastics the way it is now, which you referred to, by the way, in our last episode, which I thought was a good reference point,
Thank you.
if a sad one.
Actually, since our
Um,
last episode, now at the time I had a plastic fork in my brain. Now I have a plastic knife. I'm going to have a whole set of
a
cutlery
whole
in my
set.
brain soon. Plastic.
Yeah, you could go to a picnic without, you don't need to bring any utensils. They're already
Yeah,
inside
I
your
just need to
head.
bring a brain surgeon. Yeah. So
So,
anyway, where were we?
we
The
got,
show, the other fascinating thing the show was the look of it, how they dressed the characters, the precision of its faith to the times, the language, everything they said, everything they did, the news around them was epigrammatic of the time. Sorry, I had to use that word. And
yeah, what are you, German?
yeah, they. Uh, but I watching it the second time around, I realized what they were going for maybe was Technicolor to make it look like Technicolor, that sort of
Oh, that's interesting you mentioned that, because
garish colors on women's lipstick. The
Matthew
clothes of the
Weiner,
times, the color palettes were so different. However, when they don't get it right, it looks like an episode of All My Children or As the World Turns. It sort
I
of
mean,
looks cavey.
Matthew Weiner mentioned that Hitchcock was a big influence on him. I assume he was talking about the Technicolor films like Rear Window and Vertigo, which had a lot of really bright colors in them. But so those look accurate to the era. What do you mean by All My Children? What's
I
that?
mean, sometimes the lighting, they do it wrong, or maybe they took a shortcut, but sometimes the interior shots, it looks like a set. It looks like a set of, someone went down to
Ah,
Steiner Studios to do
but
to do
that
a round of All My Children. It it
but
it
I but
just looks
I
fake. It looks bad. It looks badly lit often.
I read an article that HBO is broadcasting a 4K version, which uh, no, I was going to say exemplify. It's the wrong word, but
That would explain it. If it's in
yeah, it
4K,
looks
you can
different.
see the imperfections a
They
lot
actually,
better.
yeah, it shows the imperfections, and it shows the set more than you. That's why I don't like to watch 4K. I like a softer image. I have a projector, and I project, everything looks more softer and sort of celluloid like. But if you watch things on a monitor now in 4K, it looks like it's digital, like it's a soap opera often. But that partly might be that you need to calibrate your monitor better and put it on film mode, because you can fix that to some degree. But there have been complaints that the 4K is it not even a broadcast? The 4K issuing of the HBO version of Mad Men is accentuating um, uh, both errors, such as technical people in the background which weren't masked properly, and the lighting and the set, which can look. So you're seeing it differently from the way I remember it. And I just watched some of the first episode on Amazon Prime, and it was softer. It wasn't 4K. So maybe that's the way. And so people are. It's literally looks different to a lot of people the way you watch it now. If you're watching it
Well,
on
that
4K.
that would explain that.
Yeah.
It it's kind of the show is kind of miraculous in a way. It put us in the world of a specific industry and created drama out of it. That doesn't help. That doesn't happen. That happens seldomly, I think, except police procedurals or legal thrillers or something like that. And I had a thought that it's a little like watching an Aaron Sorkin production, but with less idealism and less passion and a lot more cynicism and a lot
Yeah,
more black humor.
cynicism. Yeah, it's quite cynical. It's quite dark in places. He's a very troubled he's a very troubled character. He's living a duplicitous life, which tears him in half, almost literally, because he has a secret life. He has a different name. I mean, he takes on a persona. He takes on someone else's persona. So he's not a real person in some ways. I think he's living a double life. Um,
And then
and
we had talked earlier about how it also captures this other milieu. Sorry, I had to say another weird word. Um,
and no one understands what you're talking about, Jim.
well, it's this world of commuting from the Hudson River villages
Mm.
of I don't know, name one. They live in Ossining, and getting on the Metro North train and going to work in the city, New York
Yes,
City.
and we commented
And
that
John, John Cheever, the author, was a champion of that. And I was just listening to a New York Times book review podcast that revealed that no one's teaching John Cheever these days. So we're back to this theme about what's the generation gap? What does someone Antonia's age, who is my daughter, who is 22, what is her experience of this show?
does
And
she know Cheever?
what is she seeing that I'm not seeing, and what do I see
Has
that
she read?
that it will completely go over her head? I heard, they cast a character saying, "Well, for Pete's sake." I don't think I've heard anyone say that for 25 years or something.
But can I just
Who's
interject?
Pete anyway?
Can I
What?
just interject? Does does Antonia know Cheever? Has she read any Cheever? Is that a reference point that she and her? I guess not. If it's not taught in the universities and high schools, is she not familiar
She doesn't know John Cheever, and no, she doesn't.
with John
I
Updike?
mean, no, she wouldn't know. Or John Updike, no. These are still
Yeah,
sort of somewhat contemporary authors, but she was an English
but
major, so she's
they're
had the canon, but she
authors that
doesn't.
we grew up with, so we had that reference point when we were watching Mad Men. But it moves from sort of Cheeverville, Updike land, to the time it reaches the late 60s counterculture, he is a man out of time. He is not comfortable in that moment. There's a scene of him listening to the latest Beatles. I think it may have been Revolver, latest Beatles record. He has to listen to it on headphones because they didn't get the right, didn't have the rights to to use the music itself. He's listening to the Beatles on headphones, and he doesn't get it.
Really?
He thinks it's rubbish. Now, what is this?
Was he snapping his fingers?
He can't. It doesn't compute for him.
Do love me do.
He's a
That wasn't
Frank
on Revolver.
he's a Frank Sinatra guy. He's the Rat Pack. He's not the Fab Four. So Don Draper's literally a man out of time. By the late 60s, he doesn't get the Beatles. He doesn't get the, he tries the goes to a Rolling Stones concert and waits backstage trying to hoping to persuade the Stones to record a song with the lyrics changed about Heinz baked beans.
They
That's
did
how
that, didn't they?
that's how out of tune he was. His Stones wouldn't even see him. He was, Mr. Commuter guy. He was
Talk about out of time. Maybe they could have taken the song Brown Sugar, which is a kind of a racist song. Brown Sugar, I like it on my beans.
look at all my beans, Heinz baked beans. Um, with the Who makes fun of that commercializing in is it a quick one? No, Sellout. The Who Sellout. I mean, they were making fun of the idea of selling out. Now with influencers, that's commended. You sell out and you support yourself in selling out and having absolutely no ethics whatsoever.
You know what I love is the show Slow Horses, the musical theme for it, and it is
Mick Jagger.
unmistakably Mick Jagger, and he must have recorded it in his 80s, and he sounds great.
Yeah,
I
and
wish it was. I wish they'd found a way to make it a full length song.
he did it. Well, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can get it. He did it because he's a fan of the books. He already was a reader of that series, and he wanted to get involved. They didn't. I don't even. I don't think they even asked him. I think he asked if he could do it. No, it's
He,
brilliant. So anyway, getting back to Mad Men. So you're seeing it. You have a bi-generational view of it when you're watching it with your 22-year-old daughter, and um, a
And
you were
rewatching it
doing.
with Carol, who we were transfixed by it. There's another weird word. We were glued to it when it first emerged. It was the talk, and you know, maybe we should reflect a little bit now. I was in advertising at the time, so boy, did it generate a lot of excitement
Yeah, I
across
was too.
generations at the office. And
Yes, yeah. Well,
you were in advertising too,
yeah,
and we were
I
both
was in
involved in copy, not
we were
art.
both in advertising in the eight. I was in advertising in the 80s and 90s, and on Madison, I did freelance as proofreader. It was part of it was on Madison Avenue, and in the 80s, that was only well 20 years, 25 years after the setting of Mad Men, and the world had not changed that much. Now it's completely changed. They don't even call it advertising for the most part. It's sort of communications, and I don't know. You know this better than I. You're better on these the contemporary terms than I am. But it was a recognizable world, although that was 20 years before the series was made. But when you and I watched it, we would have recognized aspects of it from our own professional lives. Is that what you got? Was it? Did any of it
You
ring
know,
true?
I stumbled into advertising because they needed someone fluent in financial services. So that was my background. And when I walked into the agency, I could not believe what was happening around me. I mean, the you know, the creative side was interesting. There were images pinned on the walls. People were bringing their dogs to the office. They were having affairs. On Fridays, the agency where I worked had a drinks cart. And if you're working late on a Friday, and that's one thing about advertising is you work like crazy.
Mm,
Someone would come by with a little quaint looking little cart made out of I don't know, looked like it was Viennese or something.
mm.
And they'd make you a drink or you'd have a beer and then you'd continue working on a
Where
Friday
was that?
afternoon.
Where did you
Yeah.
work? What company was that?
That was at an IPG agency called Gotham. And later I went to an Omnicom agency called Doremus.
Oh
Um,
yes, I worked at Doremus. I don't remember people bringing in their dogs. That's a new one on me. Who brought their dog into the office?
there was a guy who would walk to work with
Ink?
his dog by his side, who would sit in the office all day.
Mm.
It was a cliche. It
Was
was
he
very
blind?
trite. He should have been fired for being trite. Um,
He wasn't blind. This was someone who didn't have wasn't a seeing eye dog. Maybe it was a copywriting dog.
Well, I guess the point of it is that, you know, by the time we were in advertising 30 years after the fact, it still was a place that was lawless from the point of view of human resources. Any of the behavior I'd seen in the ad agency would have been a lawsuit or a case for firing from, or at least, being sent to HR jail because uh, it was really out of control
You
in
mean
many
now? You mean
respects.
if that behavior had occurred now, that'd be a case for those things, but not at the time. Is that the
If it had
point?
occurred in a financial services environment at the same time,
Oh, really? Okay. Well, yeah, I've never worked in financial
none of
services.
this was acceptable.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But that's the world of advertising, and that it was even more extreme, I think, in the '60s and '70s. I know I remember, and then there's the client service part of it. We see that happening in Mad Men, where they're spending huge sums of money on the clients. And I remember I
Mm.
stumbled into a client event that was downstairs, and I don't think there were 6 people, and I think they ran up a $1,500 bar bill.
Oh,
And
right.
later, um, one of the account executives the next day was really hungover and was falling asleep at her desk and went home. And that's another thing about advertising is pranks.
Yeah.
You like to prank everybody. You like to prank each other.
Because they're
And so,
creative, because of the tension, because they're trying to break the
well,
stress
so a friend
level.
of mine recalls that someone was so hungover, um, she'd fallen asleep at her desk. This is a friend, and when she came back, they'd drawn a chalk line of her body on the floor when she came into her office, like like it was a complete like a crime scene. And they
Yeah.
actually got the yellow tape.
Oh, brilliant. I remember my boss used to take naps under his desk. He actually had pillows at the office, and and we worked in his room. It was a big office, and while we were working reading proofs, he was actually taking a nap under his desk. And people would come in. His supervisor would come in asking where he was, and we'd say, "Oh, he stepped away from." The office. He'll be back shortly, and we didn't want to get him in trouble.
But
He had a
I also remember, I mean, not to go too far down memory lane, we should get back to Mad Men, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember, you know, it was one of the first jobs where I had permission to be creative
Mm,
professionally, and it was so exciting to me. And we had a new chief creative officer. It was a pretty small environment, pretty small agency. And he looked at my work. He said, "Jim, I think the client will like this." And I was really excited. He said, let's take a look at it. Let's revisit it with the client on Monday morning." I was like, "Great." I realized it was 4 o'clock on Friday.
mm.
And I went to the office in advertising on the weekend a lot more than I did in finance. And it's a hard working world.
Yeah, and you
And
see that in Mad Men. That's they're working on the weekends. They're work well, but they, of course they take 2 or 3 hour lunches, the three-martini lunches. They have it's a very weird work schedule. Do you remember the series 30 something? Because that featured advertising as well. The two guys in that opened. They left a larger agency and opened up their own boutique agency, and that made copywriting look really glamorous, really creative. Although they're always going out of business, it looked and it was financially difficult and suspect, but it did look kind of glamorous. And there was a creativity in the copywriting I've done. Well, the copywriting I've done has not been that creative, you certainly see the creative side in Mad Men. And
well, and the money's there. I mean, if you're a small agency and you have the resources to accommodate a large client, everyone gets rich. Everyone gets paid. You have a giant payroll, and all the partners have giant bonuses.
oh,
That
and
it
they run with
happens.
that. Oh
Small
my,
agencies land Fortune 500 companies,
yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah.
multi-million, $100 million accounts. So
What
there's a
was?
little bit of that aspect to it. But back to Don Draper, I think the other miraculous thing about the show is he's just in many ways so unlikable. He's a liar, he's a philanderer, he's a
Yeah,
jerk. He's a
he's a
bad
jerk.
boss,
Yeah.
and yet somehow someone that unlikable carries the show 7 seasons.
Well, because it's John
How does
Hamm.
that happen? How-
It's John
Besides
Hamm. That's
his
why.
lantern shaped jaw,
Oh, but
what else
it's
does
John Hamm is a very likable actor, and he's and what I like about him is that, and we've seen this in his post Mad Men career, he doesn't have the vanity you usually associate with a really good-looking guy. That's why he reminds me of Cary Grant, who never took his own looks seriously, and could make fun of himself. And I think John Hamm is superb comic timing. And that film that we've both discussed, Confess Fletch, which came out about 3 years ago, and that's seriously funny. And he's been on Saturday Night
Well, he
Live.
plays
Sorry,
the eponymous, oh, there's that word again. Another word.
shut
Sorry.
up.
Uh,
People know these
that
words.
he plays the private eye Fletch,
Yeah.
and he's just it's one of the best post Mad Men casting decisions he's made that he's
Oh yeah.
accepted since the show
Well,
ended.
yeah, I like him
He's
in
incredible at it.
Your Friends and Neighbors. He's very good in that. He's good in everything I've seen him
He's
in.
good in it, but it's a crappy show. It's poorly
I mean,
written.
compare him with George Clooney, and George Clooney also is a good-looking guy. But as it turns out, Clooney is much more, I think, much more vain than John Hamm is, and we saw in Jake Jay Kelly that he can only go so far in playing an unlikable character. And I think that was unfortunate. I think that was a missed opportunity. Whereas John Hamm, yeah, Don Draper is not a
Well,
lot.
let's talk. Let's compare them. Do you attribute George Clooney's inability to be a bad character and carry a whole feature film to his acting or to the writing? In other words, did Matthew Weiner and team write Don Draper so well that he could carry the season? carry the whole show over all those seasons as a
Well, I
leading
mean,
man.
there's a difference in the two that the Mad Men wasn't written for John Hamm, but Jay Kelly was written for George Clooney, and so I think it's and wouldn't that film would not have been made without him. So yes, I think he had much more responsibility or influence over the writing of that script than I think John Hamm may have influenced the writing of the episodes as they went by, but it initially was not written for him, and I think they were looking for someone not quite that good looking originally, but when he came along, he was just perfect for the role, and it doesn't hurt that he is good looking.
Well, I guess that's the thing. A character that unappealing in his soul had better be good looking, because otherwise
Yeah,
you can't
I
lay
think that's
eyes on
right.
him for
It's
six
just a
seasons.
commercial reality, and also he's a womanizer, and so I think it helps that he's so appealing, or at least attractive initially. You know, he's good looking, and so you can believe him as a womanizer or as being very attractive to women. Whereas if he wasn't good looking, he'd be a much more transactional or much more sort of predatory, um, character sexually.
Well, I'm watching it with two adult women
Yeah,
and from
their
two
reaction to
different
that.
generations,
Yeah,
and they forgive his trespasses.
because he's so
Um,
good looking.
well, you can only speculate. I haven't heard
They
that,
haven't
but I just
really.
sit there and quietly watch the program.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a certainly. Yeah, I think that's right. I think women and men both liked the show, and I guess if he wasn't as good looking as John Hamm, that would be a tougher character to stay with for seven seasons, right? I mean, um, I can't. I'm trying to think who else could have played if it was Paul Giamatti or someone. He would not be as quite as likable and as smooth as that character. But then one of my favorite actors in it is Jared Harris, who isn't traditionally good looking, but he's such a great character actor, and he's so good. He plays the British sort of financial figure brought over from London to sort of right the ship financially and cut costs and keep them on an even keel.
He's incredible in it. It's interesting. It would be a good exercise to sort of take stock of all the actors post Mad Men, whose careers flourished, who's stayed the same. It's so,
Mm.
especially during the pandemic, where everyone was watching streaming. I mean, the pandemic was the greatest gift to streamers,
Oh yeah,
and
unbelievable.
everyone was
I
watching
think they planned it. I
TV,
think
but you're basically taking it in by the pound.
yeah,
And IMDb, another beneficiary of the pandemic. And you watch these shows, and your favorite characters, they go into actor Neverland for some reason. But in Mad Men, I think one really maybe underappreciated character is John Slattery, who plays Roger Sterling. What a great actor! He's good in everything. He even had an appearance in Sex in the City as a politician who's dating Carrie, who has a very unusual sexual kink. Uh, but post
okay.
Mad Men, he's quite reliable. He makes, I would call it a cameo appearance in Confess Fletch. So you
Mm.
actually get to see
See them both
the
again.
two
Yeah,
of
no,
them working in a working environment again,
he's
teamed
great,
up,
and
and
he
it's
was
just a great moment in that
he was
film.
working a lot in the theater. I think before he got cast in Mad Men, I saw him on a panel, on a video, on a panel discussion about the for 10th anniversary of the last episode of Mad Men, and he hadn't aged at all. When he's in Mad Men, he looks older than he actually was, and now he looks younger than he actually is, or the same age he did 20 years ago. And John Hamm has aged well,
How does he
too.
do that?
I don't know. It's maybe these protein supplements that we are going to offer on sale from our podcast. The Boomer has it nutritious tablets.
This being New York, I had to go to an oral surgeon, and we became chummy. And he was a man about 75 years old. He was still practicing in Greenwich Village, and we were talking a little bit about theater, and he told me, he and his wife, they go to Shelter Island on the weekends, and John Slattery is there with his wife, who's also cast as Mona
Yes,
in the
his wife
TV
in the
show,
show, his first wife.
and that they're quite gregarious in Shelter Island, and they the three she he and his son created a some kind of theater piece in Shelter Island, and the whole village went out to watch John Slattery and his family on stage.
Oh, that sounds great. And here's some trivia for you: the actress who played John Slattery's wife, who's his real wife, who was her first husband?
Oh, what I know about her was she was in a lot of sort of like teen exploitation movies and
That would be
rom-coms.
her first husband was George Clooney.
What?
Yes, she was married to George Clooney in the early '90s, I think.
We
Yeah,
just closed the circle.
we
We were just
closed the
talking about
circle.
George.
That's the kind of service we give you. That's on Rumor Has It. We always close our circles. It's a great. What's the name of the actress who played Peggy Olson? Because she's had a fantastic
She's
career.
had a stupendous career, and I
Began
don't
on the
remember her
West
name.
Wing as the daughter,
She
and
started
then
as, one of her first appearances was on The West
and
Wing.
then she and then after that she was in the dystopian uh, sort of abortion ban series. What's that called? I'm having a
Elizabeth
brain in-
Moss,
There we go, Elizabeth Moss. What was the series that I'm thinking of that she was in after
The
she won?
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale? Yeah,
Handmaid's Tale, which
Handmaid's
we couldn't tolerate because we have a Quaker in the house and there's too much violence and darkness.
Yeah, but very successful series, and she's managed to she's chosen her roles very well, and that's a great character arc um, that Weiner gave her in Mad Men.
You
She
could
represents.
rewatch it with an eye towards the feminist take on the whole
If
series.
you just followed her character, yeah, absolutely. There's the feminist take because she
Because I would
is
argue that it doesn't treat people of color very well. There isn't much sophistication, and actually, that's what helped us bring the show to life, was finding a terrific, very thoughtful essay in the New York Times by the essayist and critic Maya Phillips, her experience watching Mad Men as a person of color, and she felt it was deficient. But
also, I mean, but
we
she,
might
yeah,
also say that they were a champion for women. If you look at all the character arcs, not just Peggy's, but Joan's, right?
yeah.
Joan evolves into uh,
Well, she becomes a
without
partner.
giving too much away. I mean, she becomes a professional woman, and Betty, who puts
Who
her foot
leads?
down with
Yeah, no,
Dawn.
I think that's right. I mean, I think excuse me, there are different ways of looking at its perspective on people of color because it's very much from a waspy viewpoint, and I made the point that there are very few Jewish characters on this series, and this is the show's created by a Jewish writer, Matthew Weiner, was writing from a very waspy point of, I mean, the character, the show itself, from a very waspy point of view, with people of color and Jewish characters very much in the background. They make a joke of it on the very first episode, where they're bringing in a Jewish client, a prospective Jewish client, the woman who runs the department store, owns a department store, who's Jewish, and they have no Jewish people on staff. They have no Jewish writers on copywriters on staff, and they have to go to the mailroom to bring a Jewish employee to the pitch meeting, to the point that Don Draper doesn't even recognize him and thinks that he's the client. So it's a funny moment, but it shows that a lot of those businesses were effectively restricted, just the way country clubs were. They wouldn't allow any Jewish partners or major employees or people of color either. So they're very backgrounded in the entire series, pretty much.
They
And
were very faithful to the bigotry of the times, even the casual bigotry that you would hear in a white collar environment, for sure. But
I,
actually, you know, now that you mention it, um, there is a secretary who has an affair with Roger, and he eventually marries her, and she's Jewish. Her last, I think her name is, they make her name
oh, that's
Siegel,
right. Yeah,
and
Jane.
they Jane Siegel, and they make her a little crafty, which I
Mm,
felt was, you know,
what, little like
a
little
little bit
mercenary?
harsh, a little bit harsh that they had to make a Jewish secretary crafty.
In what? Yeah,
And back to Rachel Menken, who was the client.
yeah,
She's had a great career. Maggie Siff, she was in the show Billions. She's incredible. She
yeah.
can be comic. She's beautiful. Her timing's excellent. A really
Well,
great actor.
kudos to whoever cast Mad Men because he or she did they did a very good job. And it but I want to go back to your point about its honest take on the racism and anti-Semitism of the era, which I appreciated. And I think if the show was made
You
now,
appreciated it? Is that
yes,
because
I
it's because you listen to
appreciated
Nick
its honesty.
Fuentes all the time? Is that
Appreciated
why?
its honesty that it was true to the era. I would slightly be worried that if Mad Men were made now, they would not be true to that era and 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 gloss over the racism and
Well,
anti-Semitism.
you could argue that it was a pre-Bridgerton program.
Yeah, it's not color. It's not colorblind at all, if that's what you mean. But you know, uh,
I just don't see why, if they could create a show where three female characters get their own agency in, you know, in a time when that was highly unlikely. I don't see why they couldn't have done it with some people of color characters.
which three? What do you mean that the one character becomes a partner? What are
Peggy,
the?
Joan, and Betty, they all become assertive and have their own independent lives,
But I think that's. I think that's.
despite what men would think of them in that era.
But it happens gradually during the course of the decade. So I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it's.
I'm not
I
saying
think,
it's unrealistic. I'm saying they should have had a person of color in that showing that same evolution. But it all seems to stall for every person of color in that program, which is it was the point that in the New York Times review of the show in its new incarnation, that was the
but she
conclusion.
also she admitted that she really liked the show. I mean, she was watching the show for the second
She
time.
did admit it.
She
She did
prefaced
admit
it
it.
by saying, "I think it was a fair point." Um, and we all watch things through, I guess, our own viewpoint, our own background, who we are. There are different ways of looking at that. I mean, I wasn't overly upset that there weren't enough, Jewish characters in the series. I thought that wasn't what it was about. Um, but you can criticize it from different
Yeah,
perspectives.
well, you know what? There nothing's perfect. But another criticism I have about the show and all shows is that it relied on flashbacks. And I think that's a really crappy way to tell a story. I can barely tolerate it. I can't think of a time that I've seen successful flashbacks as a storytelling device in any film or TV show.
I agree.
I can think of an example of of a show that could have used a flashback, and it was a show called The Affair
I remember
with
that series.
great English actor who we love, who's a English teacher who writes a book, and makes a lot of money, and he's got turmoil in his home. He has an affair because it's called The Affair. There's a scene where he talks about how in his working class upbringing, he he mixes a toxic cocktail for his mother with her at her request because she's in such pain from a chronic illness or terminal illness.
I don't remember that.
And that could have easily have been a flashback,
Yeah,
But
That's
the
fair.
what's
Yeah, I
his
agree. I agree that in West Wing, the
what's his name?
flashback, especially to the Korean
What
War
is that
scene,
actor's name? That English actor who was in Dominic
Dominic
West.
Dominic West. Yeah,
What an extraordinary actor. He can do anything, and he just told the story. He was telling the story to someone close to him. I don't remember. And I'm thinking, God, this is just not any actor could do this. It would be easier to show him, in his working class home, mixing some pills and yogurt and giving it to his mom, and all of us cry.
yeah.
But
I,
instead we
I know.
cry from, basically oh, the camera on him telling the story. And
Well,
it was astounding. And the
I,
West Wing's another great example of when the West Wing really went downhill in the last couple seasons. Watched it anyway and loved it. But Leo, the chief of staff, he's a young man. We're all of a sudden we're in Vietnam. The helicopter blades are blowing grass. He's creeping down in the grass, trying to
did they
avoid the
show
Viet
those
Cong. I
scenes?
was like,
Did
what are
they
we doing? What is this?
did,
It was
did they show those
insane.
scenes in Vietnam? I don't remember. I don't remember Vietnam scenes in the. Was it actually depicted in the series?
It absolutely was.
All right. Well,
And you
I
forgot
think, yeah, I
my
think it took us so much out of that world, and you have to really know how to shoot scenes like that. And I don't think they did the Korean War scenes very.
what's your take on flashbacks as a
Well, I was just going
storytelling?
to say that there's one of my favorite monologues, which George gives in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. He talks about the allegedly the greatest day of his life when he was drinking for the first time with friends of his from prep school, and it's this long monologue that on stage, it's a monologue, but when they filmed it, when Mike Nichols filmed it, he could have shot a flashback to that scene where you'd hear as a voiceover the monologue, and I'm glad he didn't, because it's so powerfully delivered, and you don't, and the point is also you don't know if it's true or not. So you don't want to see it because you're not sure what the truth what the truth of it is. I think the maybe the reason that Matthew Weiner insisted on showing the flashbacks to the Korean War is that's to show what Don Draper's real life story was. But there are also flashbacks to the 1930s when he's a kid, and there are these
Oh, he's got that bowl haircut, and he's
yeah.
talking like
Then
he's from
he's
Missouri or something.
he's brought
Yeah.
up in a whorehouse, and it's a rough. I kind of didn't want to see any of that. It felt like it was a different series, and it fit fitfully in with the rest of the scenes. So yeah, I think that was maybe a blind spot for the production. Um, yeah, we've talked
And
about the
and it would be interesting. It would be an interesting aesthetic and intellectual exercise to imagine alternatives to showing this kid in the woodshed, with a next to a mule, and hearing that it's Don, understanding that it's Don Draper and his adopted father.
the bull hair.
How can you get around that? Again, the Dominic West technique, just giving a monologue is pretty. It's pretty arresting. It's
Yes, if
I know that, the rules of cinema are show don't tell. Those are the rules of writing too. But hearing an actor tell a story,
no, I
mustering
thought you said
all
that
those
you wanted
actorly
a flashback.
skills,
I
male or
thought,
female, that can really capture an audience's attention.
but I thought you said in the affair you would have liked that flashback.
No, I would not have liked I
All right,
imagined what the flashback might have
oh, I
been, and it would have
misunderstood.
been tawdry. It would have sucked.
Right. Okay. All right. No, I think that's a point well taken. What other criticisms would you have? I mean, we can't judge whether how accurate that was. I mean, that they were, they spent a lot of time and effort on getting, the details right. And even though we were alive during that time, we were both kids. Matthew Weiner was born in 1966. He's a borderline Gen X, or on the cusp of of, of boomer rising. So he wouldn't have been of age during that period either. And he doesn't come from advertising folk. His father wasn't a copywriter. Something about this subject interested him. But it seemed accurate to me. And I was thinking, what films from the past of a period that I remember really ring true? And I was thinking Dazed and Confused. Remember the Richard Linklater film set in a
Mhm.
high school in the mid 70s? God, when I saw that, it was like a documentary. It got it so right. I thought I was stepping into my past in the summer of 1976. So would someone, I wonder if someone who was actually working in advertising in the 60s, who would now be in their 80s, I guess, if they
Well,
would
I recently
recognize that show.
rewatched or watched very late another old show. It was Boardwalk Empire, and the precision they used to make us immerse us in that prohibition era was pretty extraordinary, including the language, uh, visual props that were really consistent.
I,
I
I,
didn't love the show.
I
I
didn't
didn't
totally
love it
agree
in
with
the end.
you. To me, it felt rather movie-esque, but I think you liked that series more than I did.
By the time I got to the end, I think it, like Mad Men, I think it went on one or two seasons too long. Something comes to mind though. I don't think I've ever said this out loud, but I didn't love that they gave Dawn a happy ending.
Oh,
I
now you
just felt
ruined
like it was a cop
it.
out.
I don't know. Was it a happy ending? I thought it was a fairly ambivalent ending. He wasn't killed or anything, or he wasn't in prison. He didn't have a fatal disease, but we don't want to give away the ending, but I just thought he was struggling to fit into that new
Why
era.
aren't we giving away the ending? We've talked about everybody else's career, everyone else's trajectory in the show.
All right, spoiler ahead. Those listeners
I
who haven't reached that final episode, turn off your podcast now.
I'll put it in the text that there is a spoiler, a couple of spoilers,
Oh,
several spoilers.
yeah.
You know what? I kind of thought that, another great aspect of the show is, it's just superficial and visual. It's the opening graphics are astounding and the music's incredible, especially the drums. And
It's a
this
surprising
image of a
music.
man in
The falling
silhouette
man.
falling from a building and then landing on his feet or actually landing on a couch with a cigarette. It's pretty amazing. It's
But
like it's one of the
the music's good, but it's surprising because it's not of that era. You'd kind of expect a sort of ersatz early '60s, cocktail bar jazz trio kind of music, but it isn't. It's very of the time of
it was
when that was
conceptual.
made.
It was conceptual in a way.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
it was
we could
brilliant.
do we could probably do a whole episode on great TV and movie music. I
Yeah,
happen to think that the theme for 30 Rock and the opening credits is some of the best music I've ever heard. I still
Dirty
love it.
Rock.
It would get me jazzed up to watch the show. You weren't a big fan, but I have the same reaction rewatching Mad Men, is hearing the music, humming it, and then being ushered into the drama. But
But
to the end, Don's trajectory, I just felt like everyone had fallen so in love with him. Everyone, by that time he'd been on SNL, he'd been in a few movies, and they
John
just
Hamm,
could
not
they could
John.
only be kind to him. And I think of the term "murder your darlings," right? I mean,
Mm,
that's a term that's for writers to
yeah.
avoid falling in love with phrases and
Yes,
keeping them where they shouldn't be. But I
that's
would
right.
say they could have murdered that darling. It would have made it maybe a harder hitting show. But by the end, the last two seasons were, it more or less in my mind
The
jumped the shark.
Sopranos,
Although interestingly,
The Sopranos had
oh,
the same
yeah, go ahead.
problem. They wouldn't they didn't they couldn't kill him off. They or they were um,
They
it,
made it ambiguous. They
they made
couldn't,
it
yeah, they
ambiguous.
just couldn't do it. They
And
couldn't murder
and
their darling.
I just rewatched The Godfather 2, and he is destroyed at the end. He's lost his all moral compass to the point where um, Francis Coppola could not conceive of doing another Godfather film because he said he's destroyed. How can we do another film? And he was a decade later, or 15 years later, 20 years later, he was talked into talked into doing it. It was
with
a disaster,
disastrous consequences.
disastrous consequences. You can't come back from that. He'd given the Godfather saga the perfect ending, where Al Pacino, Michael, is is just a shell of a person. So that seemed pretty honest. Were you unhappy with the ending? Then you think he didn't deserve it? What happened? What is the end?
I
Give it
thought
away.
it was anticlimactic to me. I mean, it worked, but I wanted more from it. And I think you're right. The ending of
Endings
The
are tough.
Sopranos
Endings.
was a anticlimactic too. And you know what? I wanted to see him throw himself off a building, just like the
It
graphics. I
was
think it would have.
anticipated
I
from
think
the very first
everyone who
episode.
he hurt and insulted and betrayed would have been very satisfied with that ending.
As as a Londoner, can I just put in a good word for how different television production is here? And a season can be 6 episodes. So if you have
Beautiful.
3 seasons, it's 18 episodes. They don't overstay their welcome. It's the rare series that goes on and on and on.
By the way,
What?
uh, John Hamm makes a great appearance in a fantastic English film. The adaptation of Absolutely Fabulous, and he appears in it, and he is just
Yeah,
hilarious.
you make me want to see that film that otherwise I don't think I would touch with a barge
I
pole.
don't think not only you, I don't think anybody saw it but me.
Okay.
But it's hilarious. They're hilarious.
Graham's
What a great
mother.
classic London English
Yeah.
comedy.
Okay,
Absolutely
well,
fabulous.
I will seek that out. I want to just mention that as a boomer watching that show, remember that show was not about boomers. It's about the greatest generation, the silent generation. It's a generation before uh, the boomers. As a boomer kid, I really recognized the scene early in the series where um, Don's kids are running around with plastic bags over their heads, and and the mother, what's her name?
Betty.
Betty. Betty chastises them because they're making too much noise. She doesn't ask them to take the plastic bags off their heads. She just wants them to pipe down a bit because they're making too much noise. Just go play with your plastic bags over your head somewhere else. And
Sure.
the other
Or
scene is when she crashes the car and the kids are in the back seat. She crashes it into a tree or something. She's having one of her existential crises, and she looks back to see if the kids are okay, and they've fallen in the well of the car, and they're laughing, and that brought back being put in the back of a station wagon, no seatbelts. And if my mother braked suddenly, I'd bang my head on the ceiling, and they was probably laughing afterwards. You okay back there? Yeah, I'm fine. Ever since then, I've had hard times remembering things from the age of 6. But that rang true to me, and I would have been not far off the age of Don's son, a few years younger than him, who was played by Matthew Weiner's own son. Not very well, but that was a bit of nepo.
I'll say one more thing, and maybe we should wrap up and go to head quakes.
Yeah.
And it's that you mentioned the silent generation or the greatest generation, and they did a really good job throughout the whole show to show us former veterans who were in the workforce. In fact, I just watched the episode where Freddie Rumsen gets fired, and he has a very bad alcohol problem. They never connect the two, but we find out towards the end of the episode. It's actually one of the best I've seen. That he was an infantryman, and he'd killed 15 men, and it wasn't a dramatic comment. It was just Roger saying, "Got 15 of them, didn't you? Didn't you, Freddie?" And after the show, you think about it, and you're like, That's why the guy drinks.
That's why it's
Killed
drinking
15
problem.
men."
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I don't
But
remember that.
throughout the show, it's great that it's sort of like coming out of this World War II era when
Yeah.
basically the U.S. was emerging as a superpower after that
Yeah.
experience, after being sort of like secondary in world affairs. But
Well,
that's
that's
for
what
someone
the
else.
isn't that what the man in the gray suit is all about? With Gregory Peck, mid 50s, and he's sort of like an advertising man. He's that kind of person, and he's suffering post-traumatic stress from his war experience. That was a remarkable film for its
And
time.
that's a theme in John Cheever in
Yeah.
many of the stories.
Oh, full circle again. That's
Full
good.
circle.
You're
All right,
good.
Headquake.
All right. Okay. Well, my headquake is about the recent. No, it's going on now. The merger of Paramount, Discovery, and Warner Brothers, which I am in mourning for and deeply
Why are
worried.
you in mourning?
Well, because it strikes me as a big fan of the old studio system and the old movies of Hollywood and Hollywood history. It's really the end. It's the end of an era, and I know it's happened before. In 1935, the Fox Film Corporation merged with 20th Century and formed 20th Century Fox. And 6, 7 years ago, Disney bought Fox. So it has happened, but it's a sad in modern times. It's a very sad time. And what I'm particularly worried about are the physical studios themselves. And mark my words, in 5 years you'll be able to read a prospectus for a condo in you know Paramount City or Warner Brothers estates. They will turn those studios into accommodation, into residential units. Live where Greta Garbo walked across the street. It's going to be sad. It's just the end of the studios, and they're going to be laden with what 70 or 80 billion dollars debt. So they're going to be firing everyone and making movies with AI to cut down costs. It's a sad time, I think, for the movie business. That's my sad head quake. Do you have a happy head quake for us this week?
I do, and it's kind of unusual when it comes to me from a friend of mine and a friend of yours whose name is Michelle Wooker. You might remember Michelle from our early days in journalism in
Mm,
New York City. She's now an author. She's a policy analyst, and she specializes in world economy and what's called crisis anticipation. And this has nothing to do with it. It's that she pointed out that Food and Wine magazine covered the SCOTUS decision on tariffs.
Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court, the article was published on the 20th, and it was a great coverage about the legal reasoning, the implications, the impact of the Supreme Court voting down this emergency tariff um, claim by the Trump administration, and also did some great service work for its readers who buy imported goods, chocolate, wine, olives, olive oil,
Mm,
and and what kind of relief they might see and when. But I thought it was just interesting that Food and Wine covered it, and she's a former reporter at the Milwaukee Sentinel, so I guess she couldn't resist pointing out the incongruity of Food and Wine covering the Supreme Court.
nice
But it's
work.
a great article, and
Well done.
check it out.
All right. Before we get hundreds of letters, I just want to clean up on aisle four that Greta Garbo was not with 20th Century Fox or Disney or Warner Brothers or Paramount. She was an MGM actress. Yes,
Thank you very much.
I
That's what we
just wanted
do
to
the
make that
best here at
clear.
Boomer Has It. We self fact check.
We self fact check. We certainly do. Okay, great. Well, that was another visit to Boomer experience. Any closing remarks? We'll cut this out. I will edit. We'll fix this in the edit.
I, it's our age. It makes us tired. Let's just sign off, shall we?
Yes, sure. All right. Well, this is JB Miller in London.
It's Jim G in New York.
All right. See you soon.
See you soon.